the year, I shared with you about going through the Gospel of John, because that's one of the most beautiful accounts in the deeply theological Gospels. And our goal there was really to know Christ. The more we know Christ, the more we know how to worship properly, the more we are able to appreciate who our God is. And the other thing there is that we want to become more like Christ. And so knowing who He is as a person, as a Son of God, allows us to be able to move towards that direction. And so, aside from the fact that there are messages throughout the year that we talk about some of the practical stuff about Christian living, I also believe that it's important to have that balance between really having a sense of the transcendence of God and having the awe of God, and at the same time working on the kind of life that God wants us to live so that we are able to enjoy a full life. This morning, as we continue, especially this month towards the next 2 Sundays, we will continue with the Gospel of John. And what we've learned so far, to keep others updated, and for those of you who were just new coming and joining us for the worship, is that over the last several months, we've learned in the first chapter of John that Jesus is the light of the world. That without Jesus, there is darkness. When our lives are without Jesus, we actually live in darkness. Because Jesus is the light of the world. We also learned that Jesus is life giver. These are some of the things that John gave us testimony. John the Baptist, the Apostle John, and also the prophets. The scriptures attest to him, the prophets. He was attested also by the people, the disciples as well. And we also learned that in John chapter 1, that it was already declared that Jesus is the only way to God, right? That through Him we become a child of God. And then we also learned that what's one of the biggest things that we need to grasp is that if we don't know God the Father, the only way to know is to know Jesus, because He is the exact image and representation of the Father. The invisible God that we see, that we cannot know Him, has actually been revealed like no other way, and in such a magnificent way through the life of Jesus Christ, being the Son of God who came in the flesh. But we also see that in the first chapter, that the testimony about who Jesus is also comes from the Holy Spirit as Son of God and Messiah. And that He is not only filled with the Spirit, but He is also the one who baptizes with the Holy Spirit. And finally, we saw in the passages that He is the one who knows people and who knows what's inside of man. And He knows each one. And the last several Sundays that we've been together, right, over the last weeks, last month, was that we learned Jesus starting to perform miracles. That He had God powers to create, especially at the wedding at Cana, where they ran out of wine and for the celebration, and Jesus just did that. And this morning we continue that story, learning more about Jesus, but we're now going to take a little bit of a different turn. And the goal really this morning is really to understand who Jesus is and what He says in this passage this morning, so that we are able to appreciate and understand the love of God, the holiness of God, and the importance of worshiping God, and how we are not supposed to take lightly the holiness of God as we worship. So let me begin this morning's message by asking you, how many of you are familiar to this side? Okay, sorry. Let me just... There you go. Sorry about that. Is that good? Yeah, all right. So how many of you are familiar with this side? Does your house look like this? Oh, very good. Saying, Sister Irene? Nigel? Yeah. So, when I see a pastoral house and I see in the front of the house something like this, chances are these are Asians. Yeah. Right? I mean, you also see that among In fact, this is something really important to us, and we don't want to bring outdoor shoes into indoors. In fact, some of the schools here, right, you have a gym shoes compared to your outdoor shoes, right, to protect the wood from the gym and all that stuff. And that's why in some of our homes, especially Asians, we have our personal slippers and we have hotel slippers. Okay, so if we have guests coming, it's out there. And so it does signal without saying anything, right, that you have to use the indoor slippers. Is it true?
Yes.
Right? And when we went to Vancouver, we were in an Airbnb, a house that we rented as many rooms. It was $350 a night, but it can accommodate 3-4 families, 16 people to be exact. And when we entered, there was a really big sign there that please remove your outdoor shoes, right? And then I just discovered that since it was my brother-in-law who booked, it belonged to a Chinese guy who was having it rented. I was like, oh wait, that's why, that explains it. And so, why is that? Because we don't want to what? To bring the germs from outside into the house. Is that correct? Right? And I didn't realize this until we went on vacation recently, where we had to stop in gas stations. And you know how clean those men's washroom in gas stations are, right? And if you use outdoor shoes and you step on it, you know, it's not very clean. And there was even in this mall, I forgot which mall this was, where I wonder, how is it that some men cannot shoot it properly in the receptacle, right? And when you step on it, it sticks to your shoes, and I cringe. And can you imagine those pair of shoes being brought inside your house? Or maybe, when you think about it, what if somebody came to your house with 13 muddy shoes and steps into your carpet? How do you feel? Okay? How do you feel? You cringe, alright? Or what if this person not only steps on it, he starts walking around your home? How many of you are cringing already? And our reaction can move from cringing, like, right? Sometimes we don't say, because it's our guest, we Filipinos are not very confrontational, right? And so, if that happens, what do we usually do? We just shut our mouth, but inside of us, we're starting to cringe, you know? And this cringing turns into what? Shock. And then when we see the person starts walking with their dirty shoes, with all the germs and all the mud, we begin to get in shock. Right? How many of you get shocked when this happens to your home? Well, I do. And then sometimes it progresses from cringe to shock to anger. Like, what in the world? Why is that? Because we feel, how do you feel right now? If somebody did that to your home right now after service, somebody visited you and just did that. Right? There's a reason why I'm trying to let you understand what this is, because this is a sneak preview of who God is and how we worship God, right? And so the words that can come to mind was our house is being defiled, or your space is being defiled, your space is being desecrated, right? Trashed. The word is trash. You're being trashed, right? And to be desecrated, to be defiled, is to treat a sacred place or object shamefully or with great disrespect. You don't want people to disrespect our space, right? Which you consider sacred and clean. And for me, that is really something really big, because I have, my wife is a nurse and my son is a nurse. And you know, they're just germophobic. Every time we go out, before we eat, you make sure that you wash your hands and you put, what's this? Sanitizer stuff. To the point that our fingerprints are now disappearing. It dissolves. Right? I'm not kidding you. My wife had to have like 5 times to get her Canadian citizenship picture and fingerprints. The officer had to do it 5 times because it could not, the fingerprints could not be read. And then the guy said, oh, you must be in healthcare. Right? Because you don't have fingerprints anymore. And why am I sharing this? Because this is a really important illustration of understanding the holiness of God and how we are supposed to worship God. This morning, we're going to talk about Jesus and how he gets angry about people who take for granted or trifle or trash, the things that are holy. And so if you have your Bibles with you, please turn with me to John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. If you have, outlines, you can follow with me. John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. And I'm reading from the New International Version. It says here, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And in the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from temple courts, both sheep and cattle. And he scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." And the Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." And they replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days? But the temple he had spoken of was his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said, and they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. And so, the title for this message morning is Jesus. What angers Jesus? Oftentimes we hear that Jesus is love. No question, God is love. That's true. But oftentimes in this generation, we have forgotten about the holiness of God and the importance of the holiness of God. And that God gets angry. And here we see Jesus in all of the Gospels have never been so angry as at this point, right? And what angers Jesus? And it's important to understand the answers to this question because it helps us understand how we're supposed to worship and what is true worship about. So what does it mean to really truly worship God in His holiness? Okay, are you ready for this? Before anything else, I want to give you a background, okay, about what was happening. This was the time of the Jewish Passover. And this was a time of remembering how God has taken out Israel out of Egypt, out of the bondage of Egypt. And the final plague that was given out, especially in the word in Exodus, was that a lamb would be slaughtered and the blood would be placed on the doorpost, and the angel of death, who has come to claim the life of the firstborn, would be passed over, right? But they have to come inside the house, and so the firstborn who doesn't come under the blood, really, they would die. And so this was one of the final plagues that was sent. And this was important because later on, this picture, okay, would be a picture of what Jesus was going to do for us, right? But since then, after they left Egypt out, when God took them out of Egypt, right, they were commanded to celebrate this, to remember, so they don't forget what the Lord has done for them, right? And so it had been the custom of the Jews to celebrate this every year. And this was a celebration that took about a week. And what happened here was that as they began to celebrate it during Jesus' time, people would come from all other places to do a pilgrimage to come. For several reasons. One, just to remember. Two, those who were age 19 would come, were already going to pay temple taxes, right? And this was a time of pilgrimage, and the population of Jerusalem would swell in such a huge amount. Some commentators were saying it's going to be over almost 1.5 to 2 million people at this time during this week of celebration. There was the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and the Passover and all that stuff. And so Jerusalem at this time would have been so many people. In fact, today when you go there, you won't see the Jerusalem temple anymore. But during the Passover, you would see a sight like that, where at least in the lifetime of a Jew, wherever they are in the world, they would come at least once in their lifetime, come and pay homage and visit. Where the dome is right now was where the Jerusalem temple was. It was destroyed in AD 70. And so it still happens today, right? But this was a time when this event was happening. So this was the context and the background of that time. Okay? And in its historical context, this was really significant. This was something not to miss, right? And so, I want to just point out that the passage we just read this morning is part of a larger context of the narrative of John. And what this passage mainly going to say, and then we're going to go to the practical aspects of it, is that in this passage we see that Jesus claims to be the Son of God. This is really important. The words that Jesus used here were very deliberate. It was purposeful and intentional. And in fact, when Jesus in this passage says, "You have made my Father's house into a marketplace." In other versions, with a reference, it says, "You have made it into a den of thieves or robbers," right? But the key word here is that he actually addressed it, "my Father's house." Later on in chapter 5, the religious leaders wanted to kill Jesus because he keeps on calling God his Father. The Jews would not call God his Father, right? Because when he says this, right, he is actually claiming Godship as well, that he is equal with God. So this is really important. And so here, Jesus is saying, "You have turned my Father's house into a market, into a house of thieves," right? And so here, Jesus in this passage is claiming Godship. And later on, they would have crucified him because of this blasphemy, right? Because they didn't recognize him as the Son of God. The second thing we need to understand in this passage also, as part of the larger context, is that Jesus here was saying something really important. That he was more important than the temple, right? For them, the central place of worship for the Jews was the temple. And Jesus says here, "Destroy this temple." And he was actually referring to his body. And he was making the point that he is the object of worship. The temple, while it is important, right, is not as important as the person of Jesus Christ. The third thing we also learn in this passage is that Jesus claimed to have God powers. When he said, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it up," he wasn't actually referring to the physical temple that took them 46 years to build, right? He was actually referring to his body when he would die and in 3 days he would raise up. And here he was really trying to say, "Hey, I'm gonna raise myself from the dead," right? And who does that? God himself, right? And so this was a passage about who Jesus is in his Godship. But there are some practical aspects that I'd like to direct ourselves into this morning. And this is going to be part one of two messages because I wanted to deal with the historical background and context so that we have a deeper appreciation of what holiness and worship is about, right? So the first thing we learn about what angers Jesus here is that Jesus is angered by irreverence towards God's holiness. Remember the illustration I showed you earlier, right? How you felt. You felt when you saw the shoes traveling right inside somebody's house. You move from cringing to shock to anger. And it's actually only a small preview of what Jesus must have felt when he saw what was being done to the temple. The temple which was set apart or holy to be used to worship God. And so we see here Jesus, like never before, getting so not just simply upset, but was angry about what was going on. And one of the reasons there is that Jesus was angered by the irreverence towards God's holiness. You see, what was happening was that this honoring of God's holy temple because it was set apart. Part of the temple is the court of the Gentiles that was being defiled. I want you to imagine this for a moment. So this is the Jerusalem temple before it was destroyed, right? And you will notice here that part of the temple design that God gave, right? It was really an area for the court of the Gentiles, both on the left side and on the right side. That was part of the temple. And the purpose of that was God wanted all peoples of the earth, not just the Israelites, to come and worship Him. So that was dedicated for them. And so what has happened is that the religious leaders have allowed to bring in animals in this area. It was their worship area. Can you imagine for a moment, the part of the Gentiles where they're worshiping and their sheep and cattle? Can you imagine if we're doing this and then you see their sheep and there's goat there and, can you imagine, can you worship in a place like that? The whole area was set apart for the worship of God. But the religious leaders wanted to make more money, and I'm going to explain this later, that they have actually disrespected and dishonored God by bringing animals into the court of the Gentiles, which was part of the temple. That's why when you read the Gospels, you will see here, in the temple, the animals were in the temple. They were actually in that area over there. But that was holy to the Lord. And can you just imagine this? You see, the religious leaders were responsible for the temple, and they lacked a true sense of reverence for the holiness of God. It wasn't just the Holy of Holies that was set apart. It was actually the whole temple area, including the court of the Gentiles. Right? That's why Jesus got so angry. Because the purpose and the objective was that the Gentiles, by witness of the Israelites, would be drawn to God and they would worship, and this would be their place. Right? Now, you see what was going on here compared to the attitude of Moses and Isaiah. When you read about the encounter of Moses with God, and you see here the contrast of what was going on there between how Moses had been instructed about the holy matters and the holy things of God. In fact, in Exodus 3:5, we see Moses encountering God in Mount Sinai, and we read in verses 4 and 5, when the Lord saw that he had gone to look to that mountain, where there was some sort of a burning bush, right? God called to him from within the bush and says, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." And God says, "Do not come any closer." And God said, "Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." Wow. Even the sandals that had trodden, had stepped upon dust, and it was holy ground. And what was happening? Can you imagine this worship area of the court of Gentiles? What happens when you have sheep and you have birds? What happens there? They poop. They have droppings. They have urine. And when you walk, what happens? Oh, you step on it. Can you imagine the volume of people and what was really going on? Do you think these Gentiles were going to be encouraged to worship God being there, that place? Can you smell? Can you just imagine the smell of that? And yet, this is the attitude that Moses had, and this was what was going on during Jesus' time. In Isaiah even, there's a vision that comes to Isaiah, and we see here how Isaiah, how he felt towards the holiness of God, this fear of God because of his holiness, right? In Isaiah 6:1-7, we read here, in the year that King Uzziah died, I had a vision of the Lord, and he was on his throne high above, and his robes filled the temple, and the flaming creatures with 6 wings, each were flying over and were covered their faces with 2 of their wings, and their bodies and with 2 more. And they used the other wings for flying, as they shouted, "Holy, holy, holy, the Lord all-powerful, the earth is filled with your glory." And as they shouted, the doorposts of the temple shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Then I cried out, "I'm doomed. Everything I say is sinful, and so are the words of everyone around me." And so this realizing that the holiness of God and his own sinfulness as a prophet, right, and as a human being, he shuddered because he felt that he was going to die because of that. And he said, "Yet I have seen the King, the Lord all-powerful, and one of the flaming creatures flew over to me with a burning coal that it had taken from the altar with a pair of metal tongs, and it touched my lips with a hot coal and said, 'This has touched your lips, your sins are forgiven, and you're no longer guilty.'" The picture here really is their attitude towards the holiness of God and how they fear and tremble when they encounter the holiness of God and the holy things of God. And so while Jesus is, first of all, is angered when we are irreverent about these things, right? When we take for granted or we trifle with the holiness of God, when we take for granted that God is holy. Yes, God is loving, but we should never forget that this loving God is also a holy God, and we cannot just talk about the love of God without considering the holiness of God. It's like, yes, your parents love you, but it doesn't give you the opportunity, because your parents love you, to disrespect them. Is that right? Is that right? It's the same thing, right? Just because I'm loving toward my kids does not give them the right to abuse that and to disrespect me, right? It's the same way. The second thing that we see here, Jesus is angered when we exploit people. Okay? Jesus wasn't just angry because they occupied the court of the Gentiles and they trashed it, right? It was also because what they were doing inside. They were actually cheating people. If you look at the other references in the Synoptic Gospels, we will find out that not only did they trample the court of the Gentiles, they actually took advantage of the Jews who were coming to worship. And they took advantage also of the Gentiles who were coming to worship. And that's why Jesus was upset. There was this gross exploitation of both Jews and God-fearing Gentiles who came. And I'll show you proof of that in the text. You see, what was happening was that they were declaring the offering. They were in cahoots with the shrewd Jewish businessmen. Okay? And so what had happened is that these people who, para makasave, so they can make the pay, they brought their own animal sacrifice. And then when they got to the temple, these guys would, in cahoots with the businessmen, say, oh, that's unfit for worship. You should buy from the accredited suppliers, of the church, says the leaders. We will not accept that because it has a spot or blemish or anything like that. And so now, what would happen is that these people who brought their animals would not bring their animals anymore because when you get there, they're not going to accept it anyway, right? There was a connivance between the religious leaders and the people who were doing business, taking advantage of this law of supply and demand. And can you imagine that because of the swelling of the population that need to make a sacrifice, right? What would happen to the prices of the animals? Oh, they go up, right? And what they would do is that they would put exorbitant prices on the animal sacrifices. And if you were the one who went there on a pilgrimage, what can you do? You traveled so far, and you cannot worship. You might as well. Andito na rin lang tayo eh. We might as well. Anyway, let's just take it. Let's just pay the price so that we can do what needs to be done, right? And so they would charge exorbitant prices. Not only that, okay? What was happening is that the exchange rate was being undervalued. They undervalued foreign currencies. Why? Because they would only accept Galilean shekels in the temple. And so if you came from foreign lands, you brought a foreign currency, then you have to go to the exchange table, right? And what happened there is that they would undervalue your exchange rate. Talagang sweetik, talagang madaya, sa Bisaya pa, marama. And they would cheat people, not only from their exorbitant prices, but also from the exchange rate. And how do we know this? Is there proof to this? Yes. Because when you read the same gospel accounts, the event in the temple, in Matthew 21, in Mark 11, and Luke 19, you know what Jesus says? You have made my house a den of robbers. Ginawa nyo kung saan magnanakaw. And who do you think approved these suppliers inside? They were the religious leaders. They stood to benefit from it, and no wonder they could afford, right? And so Jesus was really angry, not only because it was being trashed, but because they were exploiting people. In Proverbs 11:1, and then here's the important point here, is that when we think about worship, we cannot really separate worship from our daily lives, right? In Proverbs 11:1, it says there, Proverbs 11:1, the Lord detests dishonest deals, but accurate weights finds favor with Him. God gets angry when we cheat people. When we cheat people with their salaries, when we cheat people with their labor, when we cheat people with the product that we're selling, we're claiming that this product is like this, but actually no. When you go to the market in the Philippines, you would have to be careful what you buy. That happened to me. You know what I'm saying? They have pre-measured bags that are underweight behind the table, and when you think you're putting on the scales, right? you're buying stuff, vegetables or whatever meat, they kind of pretend to have dropped something, they pick it up, they drop what you actually measured, and they pick up the one that's pre-weighted, which is underweight. Has that happened to you? That's happened to me. Right? If not, they will give you fake money. Right? That happens a lot. And so the Word of God says, the Lord detests dishonest scales. And they were cheating these people who came to worship. They took advantage of it. Right? God is upset with that. In Amos 8:4-5, we see here, that was being done. Here it is, you will trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over and we may sell grain, and the Sabbath being ended, that we may market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales. God is upset. I mean, and in Isaiah 6:1, it says, for I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery. When you steal from somebody, it's not just home invasion. It's about doing legit business but cheating the other, not giving them their due. It says, I hate robbery, right? Or robbery with a burnt offering. Can you imagine that these people were cheating people and they were worshiping God? Really? How can you separate that? How can we raise our hands to heaven, sing our songs, and yet after worship, after the church family worship, we go with our business deals and we cheat people with our business? Or we cheat our employers. We take more breaks than we should be up to than it's allowed. Right? Cheating. So Jesus was really upset there. The third thing that Jesus gets angry about is that Jesus is angry by hypocrisy. Okay, and this is a big one. The hypocrisy, the appearances, the appearance of holiness, but the lack of it. Okay? Jesus is angered by hypocrisy. You see, the religious leaders, like I said, were in cahoots with shrewd businessmen, Jewish businessmen, who approved the turning of the outer court of the Gentiles into a marketplace, were the ones who stood to benefit from all of the business. They actually abused their authority, as ministers, right? They abused their power. They made money out of the worship system. They enriched themselves with the so-called worship. And you know what? They were used to receiving and giving bribes. Chances are, those people who got a spot, the prime locators inside the court of the Gentiles, gave money for that space. Para makuha nila yun. Right? Why do I say that? Because it had been their practice to bribe people, use money to manipulate things in their favor. Okay? And the religious leaders were in cahoots because they were the ones who approved it.